Hello everyone, I'm Jay, engineer at Find My Past, and today I'm going to be giving a sort of lightning tour of what records and tuples can do for you. I'll be going through what records and tuples are, how you can start experimenting with them today, and why I think they will be a great tool for JavaScript programming in general, but focusing on React specifically. However, I think the things I'm going to talk about in terms of React are things that you're going to be able to take away even if you don't use React, like and how you might use this elsewhere in cases where reactivity and immutability are important to you. So what records or tuples are? They are a stage 2 proposal for the JavaScript language. That means that there's interest in it, and there's been a good amount of work on the spec, but it's not part of the language yet, and it's not finalized yet. It's not implemented by any vendors, so it doesn't work on browsers, it doesn't work on Node.js, but there is now a Babel transform polyfill available, which means if you set things up right, you can have a code base where you can write these in code and they will work as spec'd. However, the polyfill is still experimental. All of these things are subject to change. There's some possibility it might not ever end up in JavaScript, so you definitely shouldn't use them in production. This is for like testing it out, thinking about what it could do, and also feeding back to the proposal if you have any feedback about it. So to go specifically into the features, records and tuples are a new type of thing that you can create in JavaScript. Something that has been called in the proposal compound primitives. So tuples are array-like and are declared using an array-like syntax. Records are object-like and are created using an object-like syntax. But unlike arrays and objects, they can only contain other compound primitives, so tuples and records, and primitives like strings and numbers and non-undefined. And essentially anything that you can put in JSON, you can put in tuples and records, and everything in tuples and records can be put into JSON. In fact, this interoperability, this serializability of records is something that is itself quite interesting if you want to guarantee that something in your application is always serializable. This is a way to do it at sort of the syntax level. You can't put anything in a record that can't be transformed into JSON. And so they act a lot like primitives. So they're immutable. So if you think of a string, you can have a string hello world, but you can't then change it to just be hello. It will always be hello world. The most you can do is reassign a different string to the same variable. Tuples have all the array methods that create a new one. So .map creates a new tuple. .reduce, you can do that, but .push doesn't exist. It's an error. Anything that would modify the tuple can be done. Also, they are compared by value. So again, analogizing to strings, if you have a string hello world created in one place in one function, and a string that also contains hello world created in another place in another function, those two strings are equal. But as you probably know, this is the case with arrays. If you declare arrays with the same content but declare them in different places, they don't compare as equal to each other, because what you're comparing is whether it's the same object created in the same place and time. But tuples and records, they act like primitives. They're compared by their contents, and because their contents can only be other primitives, tuples, or records, that works all the way down. And so these are the two things that we can use to express a lot of things that couldn't be expressed before. And I'll get into that in a minute, but first, if you want to use this, it's really easy as long as your project is already using Babel, because you only need to install 2 dependencies, and you need to put in a few lines of configuration in your Babel config. Oh dear, I smashed my keyboard. A few lines of configuration in your Babel config. This does mean that if you create a new project to play around with this with Create React App, you'll need to eject to be able to do that. But yeah, just put in the plugin proposal record in tuple. Give it the syntax type hash. The other syntax type is for a different kind of syntax for the same functionality. That's not the one in the proposal right now. And then the easiest thing you can do is give it import polyfill true, and the only thing that does, it automatically imports the polyfill whenever in any file where you're using these, so you don't have to do that manually. And then you can go right ahead and start using records and tuples and start seeing how they might change programming. And I'll go through some of the ways that you would do that now, and I've played around with this a little bit. I've also been reading some stuff about it. So for React specifically, so one of the really interesting things about this is to be able to express and force immutability at the language level, which is something that we've been trying to do a lot in React, because in React, certain things you need to treat them as immutable. And here this is a bit of like a spot debug. You know, we have an array in state, and we're trying to change that by mutating the array. This doesn't work, but kind of awkwardly, it doesn't error or anything. It simply doesn't update on the screen. So it's kind of a difficult thing to work with. This or this, where you have the mutation, you have it inside a set, the set item function, but it's still mutating. In fact, this was such a common thing that people wanted to do, that there was this, you know, the immer library was created, so you could do this kind of pattern, and it does work, but in React just by itself doesn't work, doesn't do anything. And I have seen a lot of developers who are new to React really struggle with this, like, you know, what is going on? Like I am returning it, just update, but it's the same object. You're supposed to treat it immutable. You're supposed to do this, but it's one of those things that you're supposed to know, because we don't currently have the tools in the language to really encode this requirement that you treat state as immutable when it comes to collections of things. With tuples, it's really easy. With tuples now, and line 4, this push isn't just not a method of a tuple. It will error. In fact, once tuples are supported in TypeScript, this could be an error right there in your editor saying that, you know, push is not a method in a tuple. You know, you can't do this. And so it gives you this immediate feedback of this is immutable. And hopefully, you know, with types, that could even be transmitted to like other functions that you might call on state. You can transmit that property of immutability. And anywhere that this value is used in the code, you can know that if you try to mutate it, something that won't work with React, it will actually error. It will actually not be possible. And the great thing about this compared to other forms of immutability is that it's really minimal, the kind of changes that you have to make. It's very intuitive. You just, every time that you would put an array, you just put that little hash symbol before it. It's now a tuple. It's now immutable. You'll see in line 13 that you do have to do array. You have to convert it into an array to actually be able to produce React elements for it. We'll see once it's in the language if that's still something that we need to do, or if the folks at React managed to just be able to, take tuples as children. But it's still easier than like object.freezing everything at every time that you might modify it. Going to the other property, which is value equality. This is another, one of these cases of a subtle bug that you kind of need to understand a lot about how React works to understand why it's a bug. So here we're wanting to fetch some data for some user IDs, and we want it to only fetch this data when those users have changed, when we've added, removed, changed them in some way, but in fact, just when the user IDs have changed. But with this current implementation, you have the problem where this doesn't happen. You're fetching way more than you need. If any of these, if this function gets, if anything, any parent changes, this function will get rendered again. Line 4 will create a new array completely. It will, and so the use effect, it has it in the dependency, it compares it, it's now a different array. It will rerun the effect. And this is something where you really have to, understand how it's comparing. And also that right now this is in line 4, but I've commonly had to debug cases where the .map that was introduced maybe like, in the parent component or in that component's parent, and you have to track down, well, what is causing this to get a new identity. And then you have to refactor to, for example, memoize it is one option. The other option is like this, to put it inside of the use effect. And that might not always work. For example, what if users change but their IDs don't? With tuples, if users was a tuple in the first place, this would just work in the intuitive way, because two user IDs tuples, if they contain the same IDs, they are equal, the effect doesn't get retriggered. If they don't contain the same IDs, they are not equal, and then it gets retriggered. It's really easy. The map can be done anywhere as long as everything is tuples. It all works kind of like you'd intuitively expect from this data flow. And this one of the great things about this immutability and value equality, that it lets us use React kind of like you think of it, you think of like, well, I'm putting this in the dependencies array of the use effect because I want the effect to be run again if it changes. And we think of change as has different values inside it, not, oh, someone, the render got run again and now it has the exact same values but a different identity. And now this has a lot of applications. React.memo to not do duplicate renders. Use memo for complete application. Anything which uses a dependency can do this, including something that you might not think of at first glance, keys. Keys for cases where you are rendering something in a loop that's not an entity with an ID, but that is just a collection of values. You can, instead of having to do like a compound key or select one thing that you believe will be unique, you can just use the whole tuple or record, in this case, as a key, which can be great if, for example, all of your data model, for example, you've parsed it from a request as a whole record, and you can just use sub properties of it that will also be records or tuples as keys, just completely transparently, not having to really think about it. Thank you. I hope I wasn't above 10 minutes. I kept going over in my rehearsals. I just really think that this allows us to express so many things that these JavaScript frameworks were asking of us, but that JavaScript really didn't have the tools to annotate. We can now annotate, and I'm so excited for when TypeScript starts supporting this, that we can get hints of like what is correct and incorrect right in the editor without even having to run it. So please do give it a try. And if you find anything, if you have any ideas, go read the spec in GitHub, submit an issue if you have feedback, and ask me any questions in Discord. Thank you.